So if you guys didn't know already, for Christmas I got this amazing book written by Maurice Hamilton, and I decided why not read through some of it and just read through it. So this is part one of reading through Formula One: The Official History by Maurice Hamilton. Also, there's a foreword from Ross Brawn. If you don't know what a foreword is, it's basically the beginning of a book. So here we go. So, Chapter 1, Introduction by Ross Brawn. And it's a picture of, I believe, the Italian Grand Prix last year, I think? It might have been last year, it might have been 2018. Introduction by Ross Brawn, Chapter 1. Technically, Chapter 0. The most striking change in Formula One since I became involved in an active role has been the increase in professionalism and resources of the teams. I had it brought home to me recently at an event in Canada. I was part of a forum and they pulled up photographs of my career at different stages. One image really struck home was my first job in Formula One, working with the newly constituted Wolf team in 1977. A team photograph showed there was about 15 of us. I was a machinist at the time. There were a couple of mechanics, one or two fabricators, and a few golfers. Not only was that the entire team, the Wolf then won its first race with Scheckter. You didn't actually say that, I'm just going to say that. That seems incomprehensible now. 15 people can't provide the catering for a Formula One team these days. That's a massive change, the biggest I've seen. In its own way, the success of Formula One has brought that change. A top team such as Mercedes, including their engine division, has somewhere in the region of 1,400 people involved, which is a credit to the success and commercial growth of Formula One. Looking back, I was very fortuitous getting involved when the teams were small, because when there are only 15 people, you get to do everything. You sweep the floor, drive the truck, make the parts and fit them. That gave me a terrific rough and tumble education in Formula One. It expanded quite rapidly from there. When I moved from Wolf to Williams, Frank was rebuilding the team and it was quite small. By the time I left in the mid-80s, however, Frank had won 2 world championships and almost overnight it seemed he had 200 people working for him. The other dramatic change I've experienced is the safety within Formula One. You had to be pretty brave to drive the cars in the early eras. The teams were almost totally focused on performance. There was also no consideration for the safety of the driver. Everyone would try and be sensible, but the problem was safety wasn't mandatory. The cars were built as light as possible, and we're also talking about a period where the driver's legs were sticking out beyond the front axle and into the nose of the car. Any frontal impact was going to break the driver's legs, or even worse. The introduction of mandatory safety standards was a major change in the history of Formula One and in my career. I am proud that all engineers in Formula One committed themselves to what was needed. That meant dealing with crash tests, strength tests, and a huge amount of research put into impact testing. The cars are relatively safe now, but the nature of the sport, they can never be 100%. Nonetheless, they are remarkable vehicles. The concept of the survival cell was a huge turning point in Formula One history. This went hand in hand with the work of people such as Professor Sid Watkins, who saw the weaknesses in safety in the medical facilities at circuits, Charlie Whiting, race director of Formula One for many years, and who also was a big influence. They carried on the work of Jackie Stewart, who was not afraid to make himself very unpopular when he was driving in the 60s and early 70s, and banging the drum about the need to recognise safety. We take a lot of these aspects for granted these days. And now 30, 40 years ago, that wasn't the case. You would, for instance, turn up for a test session somewhere and there's no safety helicopter, but the test would go ahead regardless. We wouldn't dream of doing that now. Now, I want to stop for a minute. That is a very good point, because if you didn't know already, the last fatal accident in F1 before the San Marino Grand Prix weekend in '94 was a testing accident, and it was Elio De Angelis, and there was no safety helicopter. And that's why he lost his life, unfortunately. The process has continued in recent years with the introduction of many prescriptive safety components. The Halo, for example, is one, and it was pretty controversial. But now that's a standard component every team must fit to their car, and nobody thinks about it anymore. Even though some people it became quite testy when it came to it being introduced. I want to point out that this book was written and obviously published before Grosjean's accident at Bahrain. Anyway, I'm going to continue. But in truth, no one likes change unless it's for their obvious advantage. With regard to performance, F1 engineers will examine each regulation and look at extracting the maximum out of it within the conventional interpretation. They will then look for the alternative interpretation. I know from experience there's quite a buzz that comes to taking a completely different interpretation that's valid. No one else has thought of it, and suddenly you have what you hope will be a performance advantage. If I look back over the years I've been involved, over the cars I've been involved with, a good example is the Benetton with which we won the World Championship with Michael Schumacher in 1994. We did a fantastic job. We did it thanks to a fantastically deep and diligent application of the regulations all the way through. Eminem, write that for your next song. And the Benetton was a great racing car as a result of it. With the complexity of challenging Formula 1 and the scope, there's no doubt a good big team will always be a good small team. There is no way around that. They're just able to do everything much more efficiently, whereas in a small team, you're looking for the revolutionary success. You'll never succeed with the evolutionary process because a big team is evolving just as so much more effectively. They're doing things every day to find a better material, a better way of using it, and using a better way to design it. Saying that, competent small teams are very important to Formula 1. If I had the ambition now, it would be a good midfield team scoring points, getting on the podium, winning a race, perhaps in slightly fortuitous circumstances, and also making a profit. Once you do that, you've got a sustainable system. You've got a good reason for owning an F1 team over and above the passion that drives most of these midfield teams. Now, on certain aspects I agree with this, certain aspects I disagree. Most aspects I agree, just a couple of bits I disagree with. And that is the bit about creating a sustainable system. Explain that to Haas Formula 1 team. 2018, they were gaining a lot of money from good sponsors, not only from good sponsors, but also from how they were getting on in the constructors, and yet they fell away in 2019 and 2020, not because of rich energy, but because of their own faults. Anyway, I'm getting too off track here. We are very fortunate that we have their drive and ambition because it's difficult for the smaller teams on a commercial basis. Owners such as Lawrence Stroll, Finn Rousing, I do not know who that is, and Gene Haas have a lot of passion for the sport, which is wonderful to see. But we shouldn't rely only on that. We have to make the teams commercially sustainable. When it comes to the championships, the priority varies between drivers and teams. The teams tend to value the Constructors' Championship, but I'd say externally, particularly now I've been on this side of the business, the Drivers' Championship clearly is the strongest and gains the more exposure. People are talking about Lewis Hamilton having 6 world championships, obviously now 7. They know how many races he's won, they know Michael Schumacher has 7 world championships. Our research has shown that that's what people talk about, it's what they measure. On the commercial side of Formula 1, a major change has happened more recently following Liberty Media taking ownership. Previously, Bernie Ecclestone did a great job at pulling everything together because Formula 1 teams made a pretty disparate group before them. But Bernie recognised the potential. He was the architect of putting together the commercial platform that Formula 1 has thrived off of the last 30 to 40 years. I think the time has come to move into a new era. Bernie's style was very successful, but it was quite confrontational. It was team against team, and he was very smart in recognising that dissent was never the best way of managing it all. He was never slow in encouraging a bit of conflict between the teams. We are in a new era which has a different philosophy, a different approach, which effectively says we should all be working strongly together to lift the sport to the highest possible level. The integrity of the sport is absolutely vital. is that it is a competition between drivers and between teams. The integrity of that competition has to stay sacrosanct, otherwise we lose the value of the sport. But there is scope within that can make the sport more engaging with the fans and more commercially successful for the participants. The philosophy of Liberty Media is that we're in this for commercial reasons, but we are willing to invest the money to make the sport as great as it can be. We're not a venture capital company with the single intention of extracting the maximum profit from the sport. We are making a healthy profit but putting it back in. Final page of chapter 0, and probably the end of the video. This organisation we now have within our London headquarters is focused on reinvestment by Liberty Media into the sport. This is presenting a tremendous new opportunity, and I think most of the teams will understand and appreciate that. Sean Bratches, who was our commercial director, he's now retired from Formula 1, has been a breath of fresh air. Sorry, couldn't help but do that. One of his favourite sayings is, when the tide goes up, all the boats rise with it. This is a fundamental tenet that we need to get into the participants and the promoters in Formula 1 in effect. The whole Formula 1 family to recognise, do that, and we can raise the entire sport to even greater heights, and hopefully everyone, from the teams to the fans, will gain. We are an amazing and unique sport. For example, you can talk to a driver 5 minutes before he gets into the car and competes. You can hear him communicating with his team in the race. You couldn't do that in football. You couldn't do that in any other sport I can think of. We've got this fabulous opportunity of engagement within the fans that the fans can have within the sport. And we've got to sensibly maximise that and fully recognise the unique sport that we have. Many of the things we are doing in Formula 1 have not been done before. We are achieving that by studying the fans and having a deeper understanding of their profile and what they want. Oh god, that's total lies. That is total lies. Number 1, because of the Saudi Arabian GP, and number 2, because of a certain individual, number 1, that I'm not going to name. Anyway, of course, as well as bringing new fans into the sport, we must not alienate the ones we've built up over the years. We need to protect what they enjoy. My enjoyment of Formula 1 started with my dad taking me to races. He ran the racing division of a major tyre company, and through that I found myself in a privileged position. I remember meeting Graham Hill. I never met Jim Clark, unfortunately, but I recall the drivers and everyone. It seemed to be a pretty good lifestyle. There was a lot of fun going on. You could say that. It was nowhere near as sophisticated as today. The teams were working out of rudimentary trucks parked in gravel paddocks at Silverstone or Brands. There were no motorhomes and certainly not as strong security. Everything seemed free and easygoing. That was definitely a catalyst for me to engage with motor racing and try to understand it. I loved the engineering side, and it became an ambition to be able to use that in motor racing. But I must admit, when I started, I thought I would be doing it for a year or two, then I'd go back to a proper job. And now, more than 40 years on, here I am, welcoming the 70th anniversary of a sport that has changed my life immeasurably, and yet remains as captivating and challenging as it always was. Chapter 1 complete. The foreword from Ross Brawn is now complete, and now we will hand it over to Maurice Hamilton for episode 2. I'll see you all for the next video. Goodbye.